Well, thanks, Ashley. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Laudanski, Head of Threat Intelligence here at Tessian. And I'm so delighted to host this session as we have a very strong set of guest speakers. First, I'd like to start off by welcoming David, James, and Jason, who are joining this discussion with me. And I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Let's start with you, David.
Hey there, everybody. My name is David Kennedy. I'm the founder and chief hacking officer of Binary Defense and TrustedSec. Been in the security industry for over 20 years and always working on the betterment of the cybersecurity industry and helping folks get better at defense.
Thanks, David. How about yourself, James?
Hi everyone, I'm James Fernley. I head up the IT security function at BDO. We're an accountancy firm. I'm based out in London. Prior to that, my background, very different, was in Formula One. So I was head of cyber for McLaren, and my background before that was Microsoft and Fujitsu as a technical cybersecurity engineer.
Nice, thank you. And Jason?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Thomas. I am the CIO at Cole Scott and Kissane. We are the largest defense firm in the state of Florida. I've been here for 6 years, been in the industry for about 20 plus. Also run the security program here as well.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. So in this session, we're going to be discussing the growing role of impersonation attacks to compromise login credentials and multi-factor authentication leading to account takeover. We'll be underscoring the importance of defense in depth. So you've probably seen a lot in the news recently about breaches. Some recent breaches have involved Uber and Marriott Hotel as an example. With Uber, it was a case of a contractor kept getting repeated two-factor login requests by an attacker, and eventually the contractor went ahead and approved it. In Marriott's case, it was a social engineering attack that targeted an associate and got them access into their laptop. With that said, let's jump into some questions. So, with this growing trend of multi-factor authentication related breaches, as in the case of Uber, how do organizations secure themselves against this growing threat vector? Jason or James? How about we start with both of you?
You want to go first, Jason? I'll be very British.
Go for it, James.
So to my mind, when you look at the concept of MFA fatigue and social engineering, I think obviously there's defense in depth and there are an ability to apply a layered set of controls. I think the first thing I would always revert back to, which is not as exciting, is process. So there's a level of understanding that the individuals involved in these types of breaches, they were what you call high value, high target workers to some extent, as in there was a deliberate focus. Once those credentials were sniffed on the dark web, or a dump of those credentials, they were explicitly targeted. So I think you have to be pragmatic around how effective education and awareness is within that space, as in, yes, your mandatory training programs and your mandatory phishing requirements and your testing is useful, but you still have to plan for that eventuality whereby someone is actually focused and targeted at your organization or an employee within your organization. And then I think to that, it's around kind of the behavioral side as well. So if you're seeing individuals access particular types of services they don't usually do so, you see them setting up a wide range of forwarding rules, you see them interacting with a load of applications they don't normally access, or trying to escalate privilege. All of those things in conjunction with the preventative controls could potentially limit the blast radius, the impact, as it were.
Yeah, thanks, James. Jason, do you have an interesting take on this too?
So a lot of what we're seeing, at least on the law firm side, I'm sure it affects other verticals, is, well, let's start with MFA. So we deal with clients and opposing, counsel. And what's happened a few times over the past few years is unsecured 365 accounts that get hacked. And it gets very interesting how complex the attacks are. They come in, they monitor a thread that's been going on, and you know what? They're waiting for wiring payment information. It's like they're literally waiting for that info to come in, and they come in and they've learned the language, that the type of the way, somebody talks and they steal signature blocks and they impersonate somebody on the defense side and say, hey, I know you sent the wiring information, but we got new wiring info, so send it over here. So while there is MFA fatigue, if you don't have any MFA, you're just opening yourself up to, that's it. You're done. You're done.
I think just to add to that as well,
Yeah.
because I've personally experienced that. Sorry, Paul. Is there something I'd urge everyone to do who watches this, which is go and talk to your CFO and your finance teams and define like approval processes for payment of invoices, so that in the event that all of your security and technology controls fail, there is some sort of two-step approval process and validation to make sure that if you're going to go and put £1 million, dollars, euros, whatever, into another account, that you're making sure you're explicitly calling that person and validating it is them rather than just off the back of an email. I just think that's a really important thing a lot of people can do, which isn't necessarily technology driven, but can definitely reduce the likelihood of you paying money into the wrong account.
So we change our policy internally where you have to make a phone call. If you're getting wire information, pick up the phone, verify that the info is accurate, or what they're looking for. Otherwise, you can run into problems there.
And not the phone number on the signature, just in case they change that as well, which is a very viable thing. So.
Yeah, and I think, from the reasons why these are happening, I think it was at Microsoft Ignite, over 80% of small to medium-sized businesses still don't have multi-factor authentication even enabled as a basic control. And then second, you look at what happened from Uber, specifically the push notification spamming. I've never been a fan of push notifications from a multi-factor authentication perspective. There's been a number of pen tests and red teams that I've been on where, literally if you just make the geolocation be somewhat similar to where they're at and you hit the push notification, your success rate is in the 98th percentile for push notifications. So, it's heavily abused from an attacker's perspective. And that's why we recommend, authenticator apps. Even, I know everybody hates SMS, but the attack surface for that is still relatively low as far as compromising. I know it's not the greatest thing out there, but it's still better than leveraging push notifications. And then on top of that, you look at where adversaries are heading. And it's predominantly, especially if you look at like APT29 or the different Russian groups, China, very focused on cloud-centric type of attacks. Even Lapsus, a bunch of teenagers, had a lot of success going after organizations that are predominantly in the cloud as well because of a lack of detection. So, cloud attacks and going after cloud and specializations around circumventing multi-factor authentication. We saw a ransomware group recently called Evil Proxy, which stood up that specifically offers man-in-the-middling and circumvention of multi-factor authentication built into their process of how they go after credential stuffing attacks and things like that. So the adversaries recognize that MFA is a problem. They're building their tools, techniques, capabilities, and phishing campaigns to incorporate that into there. And then you have the user population, which is the major culprit of this from a user error perspective, but it's designed that way to be as easy as possible, approve or deny. And oftentimes, it's much easier to hit approve than it is to deny, especially if you're getting spammed with those in many cases. So I think the technological controls are important. I think the education awareness is important. But I also think having, layered approaches to defense so that if those controls fail, you have other ways of identifying a potential breach. VPN access originating from a different destination that's in a different country. That's probably a good indication that something's amiss. Or, multiple VPN points that are established at the same time, through multiple user accounts, the lateral movement components. Uber's a great study on that because, they have a full-fledged security team, enterprise security team. They have monitoring detection capabilities, and these attackers were able to be highly successful in their environment by finding some credentials for our Thycotic password management server in the backend infrastructure, and then use those to compromise the rest of the infrastructure without detection. There's multiple controls there that failed around a monitoring detection perspective, as well as the preventative capabilities there. So there's a lot to do, especially in large enterprise, but also small to medium-sized businesses, which, in most cases aren't even putting in multi-factor authentication. It's a major issue that we face.
I've certainly been in a position where I was spamming myself with that multi-factor authentication. And although I've never clicked on it, but we definitely have that option to be able to report, hey, this wasn't me, right? And so users need to understand that too, that if it's not them, in the case of someone's getting spammed and they're not the ones that are spamming themselves, it's important to click that this wasn't initiated by me. And then that should hopefully set off a chain of investigation that you'll have a SOC or another team that's looking into it. So that's very important to use that functionality as well.
That's how SolarWinds was identified, right? Was, through a FireEye employee that had a notification pop up for multi-factor authentication. I mean, they had at that time compromised Microsoft, Cisco, Intel, VMware, FireEye, a number of companies from a nation state perspective. And what blew that whole case open was a junior analyst that said, hey, this multi-factor authentication thing isn't legit. What's going on? They researched it and traced it all back to what we saw from a SolarWinds major breach perspective. So that type of reporting is extremely important when it comes to these types of cases, because oftentimes we always say this in education awareness, but the users are our last line of defense in many cases, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it's so important to stress that there's a blameless culture too, right? If you're seeing something happening, it's important to speak up and to call it out, to alert on it, and just be in that blameless environment that everyone's got a hand in security.
I think
So
as
there's
well,
another question I wanted.
Oh, sorry, Paul. I was just about to say architecturally as well, you should consider how you're designing your identity controls so that they're really meaningful to a user and they have context. So what I mean by that is if a user is consistently having to approve multi-factor authentications throughout the day because of the way you've designed either your conditional access or whatever policy engine you're using to trigger that, then they're naturally going to become almost numb to that intervention, right? It's the psychology piece. It's a next finish mindset. Whereas if it's contextual and only applied when relevant and where other controls have not been met, or whatever your device compliance policies are, whatever your device trust policies are, it means when that does occur, it actually has impact to the end user. If you're seeing that thing 20 times a day, it's just like, when you go onto a privacy policy of a website, no one's reading that stuff. They're just going straight down to the bottom, right? And it's the same type of mindset. I think the human nature is such that if you're bombarded with alerts which lack that context and lack that bite, there's another reason why people would be more inclined, I think, to potentially the disregard or just say, get out of my way, approve.
Yeah, because you just get blinded by all of those repeated authentication attempt pop-ups on their phone. All right. Here's another one talking about business email compromise. Why does that continue to be a method that is successful in breaching organizations? David, how about we start with you?
Sounds good. I think it's an issue of trust, right? When you look at social engineering and why these types of attacks are successful, let's go back to Marriott on the social engineering attempts, right? Anything that is believable in somebody's mind, especially if they already have an established relationship with somebody, makes it much easier for these types of attacks to be successful. And that's why I think business email compromises, you already have a relationship typically with this company and organization. They are compromised in some way, shape, or form. And then from there, they say, hey, we've been working for months or years or whatever, 10 years, 15 years. I need you to send wire to our new banking. That's a normal request that you would typically see if you're not educated around business email compromises and you don't have the appropriate processes in place. There was a recent engagement that we were on from a threat hunting perspective where we take a look at from like just looking at data analytics. If you're familiar with the concept of the long tail, which is a old book, I think from like the 70s, but it talks, you can apply that same type of concept to data, where a lot of your high-end things that you use from a corporation perspective are going to be in the top part of the most noisy. Then as you start getting to the tail end of things around services, processes, things like that, these are the things that we focus a lot of our time in, because these are things that, hey, there might be one-offs or unusual software that's installed that isn't part of the entire company, or where there might be a potential compromise at. And we actually baselined an organization's remoting software, and they typically used, this specific product, which is a third-party product. We saw for two of the employees, they were using unknown remoting software that was a third-party license thing, but it wasn't part of their corporate standard. And we started investigating it and diving down into it and found that they had social engineering attempts, that they had somebody call them up on the phone and say they were from IT and had to download this remoting software to get access to their systems. And it was a direct data breach, of their infrastructure and environment using legitimate third-party remote software. So, when you're going after organizations and it's somewhat believable, and if you don't have that education piece there and the controls in place from a process perspective to say, hey, we request, you have to be on the phone. We have to call you directly from already approved numbers to validate this, and then do that second kind of verification, very similar to how we do multi-factor authentication. These companies are usually very subjective to it, and it's still the number one thing that the FBI has to deal with on a day-to-day basis, is these commodity business email compromises that require a low level of sophistication, and yet they still make a ton of money off of it.
I was about to say that the
we
profitability
definitely
as well it's so important, the profitability side, like how easy it is to make money from an engagement like that. It's not like you need to, and the dwell time can be as long as you like, because you're not going to set off various triggers to your SOC, right? If you're a threat actor and you've got access to someone who works in the accounting team's email, you can just sit there and wait until the dream email arrives, right? And it could be you wait until a Friday when everyone's, going home and they're in that kind of weekend mode, and 5 p.m. at night, and then, okay, oh, quickly, can you just do this before the weekend? Sense of urgency, that sort of thing. So I think as well, you always consider, I think, that kind of doomsday scenario that a threat actor's in your environment and on day one they're going to deploy ransomware and cripple your business. But that isn't necessarily always the case. They're looking for the easiest, least complex way to either make money or extort at least. And I think business email compromise, when we talk about absence of some basic controls like MFA, is still a cash cow for threat actors, hence why they're so incentivized to use that.
So
Yeah, we saw
basically,
9% of organizations experience spear phishing or impersonation attacks just this year. And to that point, prior to my time here at Tessian, when I was at another company, a financial, we had a customer that was a director of finance, and they were targeted through an impersonation attack. They were told to go ahead and open up this PDF, and they got owned, right? And then attackers got into their financial accounts and were able to move a large amount of money. So I've definitely seen it successful for a very long time now. And it just, as we see and we're talking about, it continues to be a problem. Jason, how about you? What's your take on this?
Email's easy, right? It's cheap, it's efficient, it's easy. And I mean, we see it all the time here. Hey, I want to see if you could help me with a case or help me with, I'm thinking about a lawsuit. And so here's the details in a PDF. And so, of course, everybody wants a new client, right? Everyone, it's very exciting when someone reaches out and says, hey, I need your expertise, and very easy to click on links in the PDF or whatever. Or, you'll see 2 or 3 redirects, right? So click here and then click here and then click here. And then here's your, just need your Office 365 login to view the document. And it's just easy to do.
Yeah, that's definitely why we're in this business, to try and help protect people. I'm curious, as we're winding down here in our session, how does everyone see the risk landscape evolving with regards to impersonation and attack account compromise over the next 12 months?
I'll go first.
Right.
Sorry, Dave, it's so difficult at the time, but I think for me it'd be an evolution of the channels which are used to communicate as well. So something I'm seeing a lot more of is, why is everything via email? I mean, I will happily say I think email will, I hope, die out in the next 20 years as the primary communication methods for most organizations as we move to, hyper connected, instant connected, be that Teams, be it Slack, be it another one. I see smishing, phishing, vishing, all of that across all of those avenues. But I think if I put myself in the shoes of threat actors, I would say, well, generally speaking, most organizations have quite strong security controls around email. But will they have the same security controls or awareness or training for their staff across those other avenues? So what other ways can I talk to staff? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it, is it any other mechanism? Because that's where you have a challenge, I think, in applying that corporate boundary and those real strong security controls when you're looking at those other communications channels. So I think that there'll be a far greater increase, and there probably already is, in those other communications vehicles for threat actors to try and dupe your clients or staff.
And I think
kind of dating myself here.
Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Just real quick, kind of dating myself here. I remember when I first got into email when I was running a FidoNet hub back in the day. And so email for me back when I was a FidoNet node was this long, huge thing, and it would not be instantaneous, but the email would travel from my node to the hub, to the regional hub, to the super hub, and then get transmitted out. So email's been around for forever. David, what you were going to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at what Microsoft's CEO Satya Nadella said, last year around moving towards passwordless type ways of authentication, I think he's probably too quick on the estimations on how long that's going to take. But I do think, moving off of passwordless authentication, I mean, passwords are literally all that is wrong with what we're doing, because everybody is using passwords in multiple locations. A lot of times using the same type of passwords, and human error is what's getting us in many cases. And we can try to create, password complexity requirements and all of these different things, but humans will swap out A's for ampersands and things like that, and 5s for S's, and change things around. So that still make it pretty easy, and we'll still continue to see data breaches. I think where, a lot of the effort needs to be on is understanding that we're in an environment for a long time around, and smishing, by the way. So SMS phishing has increased substantially for us of what we've seen in the past 2 years. I mean, over the past 6 months, it's increased substantially. So the trust factors around text messages and getting to people that way. I think attackers will continuously evolve. Our defenses have to be in place to understand that, hey, we're going to have credential stuffing attacks. We're going to have business email compromises. We have technology still complex. There's no magic box. It's these layered defenses that we have to have, work with good partners to get us there. And then work on, everybody talks about zero trust, but from a architectural perspective and what we're trying to accomplish, minimizing attack surface is a good thing. So can we minimize attack surfaces so that in the event we do experience a data breach of one endpoint or a system that's in the cloud, it's limited very heavily off of user permissions and access that restricts, a large cataclysmic data breach that we typically see associated to ransomware or nation state groups, at least making it much more difficult to raise the sophistication level out there. So I think on principle, we know as an industry what to do. It's just extremely hard to do it in big companies and organizations and enterprise, even in small to medium-sized businesses that don't have dedicated security personnel. So that's going to be a reliance on partners. I think managed services are going to continue to grow like crazy, working with partners that have the technical capabilities or the technologies that can help assist and augment where needed. And then, working on shoring up our legacy debt and trying to make it a much harder for these groups to actually compromise via credentials is really the only route that we have to go until we move to other, communications like James had mentioned, that are more trustworthy in nature, of seeing people's faces or being able to actually, validate in certain ways, shape or form that something's actually happening. So I think we'll get there someday, but in the short-term future, especially in the next 12 months, we're going to be under a lot of hurt still from these different ransomware groups that continue to create their high levels of sophistication, continue to research and weaponize and deploy, as well as nation states. I mean, we're going to continue to have to defend pretty heavily right now.
And for our final take, I'll let our malware engineer Jason finish us off here. What's your view on it?
So to Dave and James' point, I mean, email, text, phone, it's going to be around for a while. We were supposed to be completely paperless 20 years ago, and chat was supposed to replace email and all that stuff. It just hasn't happened, right? So I think this is going to be around for a long time. They'll just get more sophisticated in their attack methods. That's it. Am I predicting email won't be around for 20 years? I don't know, but it's going to be around for a long time. So continuous education, training, and it's not just throwing a link to a video, teaching people how to do stuff. On our side, we're very big on, it's really easy to get something come in that's, that we know is malicious and just block. The easy thing to do is just say, okay, we're just going to block it. But explaining to and educating employees on why this is dangerous or why it's an issue is the most important. I think active communication is better than kind of, your kind of ongoing, every 6 months kind of training deal where, hey, you got to watch this and this is it, because things are changing week to week now.
I agree. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I wish we had more time to keep talking, because there's definitely a lot more interesting stuff to talk about. Thank you very much. And Ashley, I'm handing it back over to you.